In October, the weather has gradually turned cold, with a large temperature difference between morning and evening. There is a touch of red floating on the blue-black water, soaking in the lake water, shaking up and down with the fluctuation of the lake water, bright and strange. It drifted slowly, as if following a predetermined track, slowly approaching the shore from the center of the lake. But at this moment, a sharp crow pierced the silent sky. Suddenly, a pale face floated on the lake. Miss Wen's gentle and inexplicable drowned. A group of reporters gathered outside Wen's mansion. In order to obtain first-hand information about Wen Ro's death, they kept holding up their cameras and attracted the attention of many others. But everyone did not find a girl sitting in the corner. She was wearing a white sportswear, with sharp eyes on her clean face, and a lavender bracelet on her fair wrist. There was a meaningful smile on the corner of her mouth, and she said softly, "This month's living expenses are here." She stood up, patted the dust on her sportswear, glanced into Wen's house, then turned and entered. In the crowd. After leaving the Wen residence, she was about to return to the house where she lived. Her name was Feng Nian, and she was a student of Zhongken University. Unexpectedly, she actually forgot to bring the door key. In desperation, she had no choice but to go to Jiama Street. Jiama Street, located in the Old City, is the only remaining street paved with blue stone slabs in Zhongken. The street was cleaned very cleanly, not even a single leaf was seen. The afternoon sun shines on the moss on the blue stone slab, giving it a different kind of vitality. Apart from the people guarding the shop, there were not a single customer on the street. Jiama, also known as paper horse and sacred paper, is used for folk sacrifices to ghosts and gods. As the name suggests, this street sells items for the dead. There are paper-making shops, incense and candle shops, and of course, coffin shops. She stopped in front of a shop. The door of this shop is two ancient, dark wooden doors. When I looked up, there was a plaque on the wooden door with the word coffin written on it, but because it was a long time ago, the handwriting on the plaque was a bit blurred, and the plaque was also a little crooked, as if it could be blown off by any wind. Feng Nian knocked lightly on the door, but no one responded. She pushed a little harder, and found that the wooden door was unlocked. She strode into the shop. Inside the store, rows of coffins are neatly displayed. Looking at it at a glance, it is so dark that it makes people feel a little hairy. But she didn't care much, and walked through the coffin to the backyard alone. "Grandma Xiang," she called out. The owner of this coffin shop is known as Coffin Xiang, but no one has mentioned her real name, so she calls her Granny Xiang. Granny Xiang lived next door to her rented house, and she left the spare key of the house with Granny Xiang. After calling 2 or 3 times, there was no response. When she was about to look inside, she accidentally stepped on a small stone and almost fell to the ground. One person stretched out his hand and pulled her out in time to prevent her from falling. All fours. This also made it the first time for Feng Nian to be so close to a man. Her nose lightly touched the left side of the man's face. There was a faint smell of tobacco on this man's body, but it was not unpleasant, but it made her feel a little relieved. With a tall nose, delicate skin, and double eyelids, Feng Nian couldn't take his eyes off the man in front of him as if he had stepped out of a painting. It was the first time she had seen such a handsome man, and no adjectives could fully describe him. Appearance. "Stand still, I let go." The man's unique voice sounded, perhaps her gaze made him a little uncomfortable, and after she stood firm, she let go of the hand that was holding her. Feng Nian noticed that apart from his handsome appearance, this man had deep eyes, and even in casual clothes, he could feel a hint of arrogance from him. It's a pity that his seal was black, surrounded by thick black hair. "Xiao Nian," Granny Xiang's voice sounded at the right time, interrupting Feng Nian's thoughts. "Here, the key is here." Feng Nian has a problem, that is, she often loses things. Counting this time, this is the 5th time she has forgotten to bring the door key this month. Granny Xiang has long since seen her as a stranger. Once she saw her figure, she knew it was the case. Come to get the key again. But this time, Feng Nian didn't take the key and left. Instead, he pulled Granny Xiang aside, took out a small wooden fish, and said in a low voice, "Grandma Xiang, let him take the wooden fish with him, he is about to suffer a catastrophe. This wooden fish may save his life." Granny Xiang squinted her eyes, she didn't expect that with just one glance, Feng Nian could see that the man's seal was black and catastrophe was imminent. Feng Nian already had such cultivation at such a young age, it was amazing. Seeing that Granny Xiang didn't reach out to take it, Feng Nian directly stuffed the wooden fish into Granny Xiang's hand. "Remember to let him carry it with you, I'll go first." She could tell that this person had a lot to do with Granny Xiang, because the mother-in-law never lets anyone enter the backyard at will, except for her and this man. This wooden fish can be regarded as a thank you gift to Granny Xiang for helping her keep the keys all the time. The man sat quietly, reading www.yuyuganshu.com until Granny Xiang handed him the wooden fish Feng Nian just gave him, then he asked, "Aunt Xiang, what is this? Take it with you. That girl's kindness can block you at critical moments." Grandma Xiang sighed softly. She watched the child grow up. It's not that she doesn't know that the child's catastrophe is coming, but she was helpless. No matter what Feng Nian gave might really be able to help him prevent disaster. As if thinking of something again, Granny Xiang said again, "This girl is a very good child, what a pity." Granny Xiang hesitated to speak, avoiding the man's probing eyes, and stretched out her hand to wave to the man. "Okay, all right, let's go back quickly, my coffin shop may not be a good place, it's bad luck to stay here. Take out the key and open the door." One living room and 2 bedrooms are a bit too big for Feng Nian who lives alone. There is no extra furniture in the house, a bed, a dilapidated wardrobe, a desk with a corner missing, a sofa, the edge of the sofa is badly damaged, wrapped in rags, and you can still see it vaguely. The sponge inside. The monthly rent for such a house in Zhongcan is at least 1,200, but when she rented it, it only cost 300. Apart from the reason of the location, the main reason is that this house is haunted. She took a bucket of instant noodles, poured it into hot water, put it on the table and waited for 3 minutes, then she got up to make tea with the remaining hot water. A white shadow suddenly floated to the edge of the table. "Don't drip your saliva on my instant noodles." She turned around and looked at the female ghost who was about to put her head on the instant noodles with sharp eyes. She still vividly remembers that last time, her bottle of milk had just been opened, and the female ghost drank it if she didn't pay attention. Lost. Seeing that Feng Nian had discovered her actions, the female ghost had no choice but to float away from the instant noodles embarrassingly. When the female ghost died for a long time, her face was pale, her lips were blue, her long hair was messy and loose, and she hadn't taken care of it for a long time. She raised her head and glanced at Feng Nian, with a hint of sadness in her eyes. "The instant noodles taste so delicious, even ghosts can't help it." Just 3 minutes later, Feng Nian quickly ate the instant noodles, and the whole house was instantly filled with the smell of instant noodles. The female ghost raised her head, desperately sniffing the fragrance floating in the air, and then looked mournfully in Feng Nian's direction, wanting to beg for a sip of instant noodles. Feng Nian ignored her, changed direction, avoided the female ghost's gaze, and continued to concentrate on eating the instant noodles in front of him. "It's not that I'm stingy, but her living expenses for this month have already come to an end. If she wants to give this instant noodles to the female ghost, she will starve." Seeing this, the female ghost's grief gradually deepened, her originally pale face began to change, her lower jaw tilted to the left with a click, and the eyeballs in the eye sockets rolled down to the ground, leaving only 2 holes in the eye sockets. Just walking towards Feng Nian's direction empty-handedly. This is the appearance of the female ghost before she died. She used this ghostly appearance to scare away the people who rented the house. Feng Nian sighed heavily, got up, grabbed the female ghost by the collar, and threw it out of the room. Although she is not afraid of ghosts, she doesn't want to look like a female ghost while eating. Since living in this house, she has seen this female ghost appearing from time to time. She can see that the female ghost has no intention of harming others, so she just let it go. Except for occasionally eating her own snacks secretly, the female ghost she didn't do anything out of the ordinary, and she didn't bother to use the spell to clean it up, so she acted as if there was an extra person, no, an extra ghost to help her look after the house. Just remember to seal the food with a charm when you go out. Just now the female ghost didn't get the instant noodles as she wished, so she turned into her pre-death appearance. She wanted to beg for a bite, but she never expected to run into a wall with Feng Nian. After eating a bucket of instant noodles, Feng Nian started to think about Wen's house. Outside Wen's house, she heard those journalists who were moved by the wind said that the reason why they got the news of the Wen family's daughter's drowning was because a small note suddenly appeared on their boss's desk. The little piece of paper was wet, as if it had been soaked in water. It had the words "Daughter of the Wen family drowned" written on it in red letters. When I took the note, I could still smell a faint smell of blood. Just when the boss ordered people to go to Wen's house immediately to obtain first-hand information, those notes disappeared out of thin air, which was very strange. Feng Nian sighed softly again. It seems that this time is not easy to deal with, and he needs to be more careful. Warm house. Ah Fu stayed alone in the room, recalling what happened by the lake in the morning. Ah Fu is a gardener in Wen's house. According to his wife's request, he will shovel all the bright red roses in the flower bed this morning, and transplant his wife's favorite white lilies. Although the flowering period has long been missed, the red roses in the flower bed are growing very well, and clusters are climbing in all directions, and the huge flower bed can hardly hold it. I heard from the servants that this is Miss Wen's favorite flower. But, the wife of Wen's family didn't like it, so Ah Fu could only obey the order and got up early in the morning to cut off all the roses and plant them with white lilies instead. To be honest, Ah Fu prefers red roses to white lilies. He is a common man and likes brighter things. This rose looks much more festive than this white flower. He didn't know anything about lilies, he only knew that this white patch made people feel unlucky. Hiss, thinking of this, suddenly a gust of cold wind blew, and Ah Fu shivered violently. Damn it, it's so hot in the morning, but it's like being in an ice cellar in the morning, what the weather. Ah Fu complained in a low voice, walked slowly to the lake, knelt down to wash off the mud on his hands. But just scooping up a handful of water, I saw a touch of red floating not far away. The red was submerged in the water, floating slightly. It looked like a red silk handkerchief. Yo, I didn't expect that Ah Fu, would be lucky in the morning. Ah Fu sighed, and some expectations arose in his heart. That's Sipa from her daughter's family, maybe it belongs to a certain lady from Wen's family. He rubbed his hands a little excitedly, waiting for the Sipa to float close. He was so focused that he didn't realize that the direction of the water flow at this time was opposite to the direction of Sipa's drifting. Here we come. Let me see which lady's champagne it is. Ah Fu's eyes flashed with lust, and he grabbed the Sipa with his big palm. In an instant, Ah Fu felt a bone-piercing chill on his hands, and at the same time, something soft and filamentous slowly passed through his fingers. Damn, what the hell? Ah Fu pouted, impatiently pulling Sipa, trying to lift it out of the water. When exerting force, Ah Fu could clearly feel the silky thing tightening up. All wrapped around his palm. A strong reaction force hit, making Ah Fu stagger, almost being brought into the water. Fortunately, Ah Fu responded quickly. Yu reading www.yuyuganshu.com sat back and used his own weight to pull his hand back. Before he had time to wipe the cold sweat off his forehead, Ah Fu saw the so-called filaments on his hand. After reading it, he barely caught his breath. I saw that his hands were covered with black hair, the black hair was shiny, and his hands were slightly purple. Why, how can there be hair in the lake? Ah Fu desperately pulled the hair from his hands, and his words were trembling. Cold sweat had soaked his shirt. Ah Fu's shouts attracted others. Madame Yu Yanhui was standing quietly by the lake at this moment, watching with her own eyes the servants at home fishing the man in the lake to the shore. It's already past 9 o'clock in the morning, but the temperature by the Wenzai lake seems to be much colder than the temperature outside. Yu Yanhui couldn't help shivering, and pulled her shawl a little tighter. The clothes of the person who fell into the lake were soaked in water, and the weight was heavy. The servants struggled to feed the person, hooked the corner of the person's clothes with a long bamboo pole, and managed to pull her slowly from the center of the lake. Shorto. Because of the distance, the people on the shore couldn't see the appearance of the person who fell into the water clearly. They could only see a floating object slowly approaching the shore one by one. After a while, with the joint efforts of everyone, the man who fell into the water was fished ashore. The face of the person who fell into the water was covered by the long hair, and the identity of the person could not be recognized. Judging by her figure, she should be a girl. Yu Yanhui signaled the butler to come forward and check. When he gently lifted the hair that covered his face, he saw a pale face appearing out of nowhere, with a sinister smile on his face. Yu Yanhui couldn't stand still for a while, and almost fell on the cold ground, and the air suddenly became a little colder. The person who fell into the lake was Miss Wen's gentle lady. She was dressed in a bright red princess dress, coquettish and flamboyant. Her curly brown hair was tightly attached to her face, but the expression on her face was so calm, as if the smile Yu Yanhui saw just now was just dazzled. Generally speaking, drowning people always have a hideous and terrifying expression, but gentleness is just the opposite. When it was fished ashore, Wenro had lost any breath. Yu Yanhui cried out on the spot, but no tears fell. She seemed to be unable to stand due to excessive grief, and needed the servants to support her to barely stand still. Ah Fu on the side has long been unable to stand. He was the first to discover that the young lady was drowning in the lake. He did not forget the horrifying feeling when he grabbed the young lady's hair. Those hairs seemed to be still moving, as if they wanted to pull him into the lake. Just like what the older generation said, people who die in the water always like to have others as companions. He couldn't help giving himself a big slap. Why did he go to fish for things in the lake? At that time, he seemed to be blinded by a ghost. There was only one thought in his mind, which was to fish out the things in the water. Miss, don't you blame me, I didn't harm you, the injustice has its debtor, you go find the person who harmed you. Ah Fu, what nonsense are you talking about, don't go down. Ah Fu spoke a little loudly, and the housekeeper couldn't help but stop him. The housekeeper saw that Yu Yanhui, who was still crying, had quieted down because of Ah Fu's words, and only looked at where Ah Fu was, with a hint of anger on her face. After being stopped by the housekeeper, Ah Fu still couldn't help but glanced at the young lady. He noticed that the young lady's expression seemed to have changed. The blue lips turned bright red in an instant, as if stained with blood. No, it's impossible, there was no expression on his face when he picked it up just now. He stretched out his finger and pointed in the gentle direction, wanting to say something, but before he could say anything, he was pushed and pushed down by other servants. Yu Yanhui took out a handkerchief and pressed the corners of her eyes, but there were no tears in her eyes. She seemed to be holding back her grief, and in a calm voice ordered people to buy the coffin immediately, put Wenro in the back hall first, and make a decision after Wen's biological father, Wen, the head of the Wen family, came back. Turning around, I saw the half-cleaned flower bed, some blooming roses had been shoveled up, just thrown aside, with dust piled on them, other roses that could not be shoveled up in the future were still exuding floral fragrance. Taking a closer look, she found that these roses were redder than usual, as if they were stained with blood. In the sun, the dewdrops rolling on the petals were also stained red. Just when she was about to let people continue to shovel up these roses, there was a burst of noise outside Wen's house. It turned out that a group of reporters had gathered outside Wen's residence, claiming to interview the truth about Wen Ro's death. The drowning death of the Wen family's first daughter is definitely big news. With a sad expression on her face, Yu Yanhui dealt with the reporters outside Wen's house who came to interview. After a busy day, it's time to take a good rest and catch up on beauty sleep. Yu Yanhui reached out and lifted the duvet, but saw a shiny thing next to the pillow. She picked it up and saw it was a hairpin. This is a custom-made, big red butterfly hair clip, inlaid with a circle of diamonds, which is even more dazzling under the light. Don't think about it, it should be left in her room by her daughter's warmth, and it will be good to put it back tomorrow. But the coolness on the hairpin made her feel as if she was holding a small icicle. She became sober again. No, besides warmth, there is another person who has hairpins of this style. She slowly turned over the hairpin and carefully examined the back of the hairpin, only to see a letter R engraved on the back. She shook her hand, and the hairpin fell directly to the ground with a pop, which was especially abrupt in the quiet bedroom. The R stands for the abbreviation of Wen's name. Wen bought this hairpin for the two of them. In order to distinguish them, the initials of their names were engraved on the back of the hairpin. She stared at the hairpin that fell to the ground with her eyes wide open. The cold temperature of the hairpin still remained in her hand. No, gentleness is dead, dead to the point. Someone must want to scare her, to make her show yourself off. She forced herself to calm down. After calming down, she rushed to the gate, opened it, and ordered the servant to take the hairpin and burn it immediately. Things used by the dead, bad luck. She didn't believe that the deadly tenderness could cause any disturbance. As soon as the episode just ended, she lifted the duvet again, trying to sleep peacefully. When the morning sun appeared on the windowsill as promised, Yu Yanhui slowly opened her eyes, and the blue color in her eyes gradually emerged. She didn't sleep well last night, and kept dreaming that someone was chasing her, but she couldn't see that person's face. Appearance. Sighing, she stood up. There will still be reporters visiting today, and she must brace herself to deal with it. For 3 consecutive days, it became increasingly difficult for Yu Yanhui to fall asleep, and every night beside her pillow, various things would always appear. The first night was a hairpin, the second night was a bracelet, and the third night was a doll. After analysis, Yu Yanhui believed that this was someone's prank, because these things are all relics of tenderness, and someone definitely wanted to slander herself on purpose in order to create bigger news. She ordered people to take all the things that appeared next to her pillow and burn them in front of Gentle's last photo. She also locked the door of the bedroom and took the key with her. However, the prank didn't end there. On the 4th night, a pair of socks appeared, and on the 5th night, a pair of wet shoes appeared. There was also a row of wet footprints in the bedroom, which seemed to be from the shoes. On the 6th night, a red princess dress appeared. That dress was originally hanging in the closet in Gentle's room. Even if Yu Yanhui sent many people to guard outside the bedroom all the time, none of them could catch this prankster. In addition to the things that appeared on the side of the pillow, there would be the sound of someone walking back and forth in the toilet for no reason, click, click, click. When Yu Yanhui walked into the toilet, those voices from Yu reading www.yuyugonshu.com suddenly disappeared, as if they had never happened before. Her complexion became more and more ugly, and she couldn't fall asleep every night. She even found a doctor to prescribe medicine to barely fall asleep. The foundation on the face is getting thicker and thicker, so that it can barely cover the dark circles. In the past few days, Feng Nian has been paying attention to the Wen family's news. Apart from the news of tender drowning, there is no other news. I really don't know if the Wen family suppressed the news, or the people of the Wen family reacted too slowly and didn't realize that the Wen family had been targeted by evil spirits. Forget it, anyway, after a few days, the Wen family will definitely ask me for help. Feng Nian has this self-confidence. She helped the Wen family's housekeeper before, and the housekeeper has full trust in her. In addition, the Wen family does not want this matter to be known by more people. It is best for her to be unknown in Zun City's choice. While Feng Nian was thinking about how to earn next month's living expenses, he opened another bucket of instant noodles. Just 3 minutes later, the female ghost appeared in front of Feng Nian again. Sighing lightly, she still used her chopsticks to put some instant noodles on the plate, and pushed them in front of the female ghost, as if she were thanking it for helping her watch the house. The female ghost glanced at the instant noodles on the plate, and asked Feng Nian with her eyes. The last time Feng Nian grabbed his collar and threw him out of the room, he was already a little afraid of Feng Nian, and he no longer dared to casually show his terrifying appearance before death. Feng Nian nodded, and signaled the female ghost to have a taste. Eat it, there's no need for too much. She couldn't help covering the instant noodle bucket in front of her tightly, speeding up the speed of eating the instant noodles. Unexpectedly one day she will be reduced to fighting for instant noodles with ghosts. After smelling the instant noodles on the plate, the female ghost disappeared in front of Feng Nian contentedly, hiding in a corner to savor the taste of the instant noodles. Today is the 7th day of tender drowning. The night of the 7th day after a person dies is commonly known as the returning to the soul night. During the returning to the soul night, the person after death will return to the place he most missed during his lifetime, usually his home. Tick-tock, tick-tock, the sound was very abrupt in the middle of the night, echoing in the bedroom. Yu Yanhui originally suffered from insomnia, but now hearing such voices in her ears, she couldn't fall asleep even more. She had no choice but to get up, ready to find the source of the sound. Listening to the sound, it seemed to come from the toilet. Could it be that the faucet was not turned off tightly? She reached out and fumbled for the button of the toilet light on the wall, and turned it on with a click, but the toilet light did not turn on as expected, but instead made a sizzling electric sound, which was even more terrifying in the silent night. After Yu Yanhui cursed secretly, she decided to ask the housekeeper to change the toilet light immediately at dawn. She took out her mobile phone, turned on the flashlight function of the mobile phone, and took a photo on the ground. Under the dim light, there were puddles of water on the black floor, extending inward. She walked along the water trail and found that the faucet was really not turned off, and water was still dripping out. Yu Yanhui tightened the faucet vigorously, but the water coming out of the faucet became bigger and bigger, from the original tick-tock to squeaky. She faintly felt that something was wrong, because the water was a bit viscous, which was different from ordinary tap water. Stretching out the palm of his hand, he found that the spout of the faucet turned out to be red blood, with a faint smell of blood. As soon as her face changed, she immediately turned around and was about to leave the toilet, but found a person standing behind her with a pale face. Ah! A shrill cry burst through the top of the room. Strangely, no one in this villa heard Yu Yanhui's screams. Noon the next day. Madam, madam, the knock on the door was very urgent. Because this matter is very difficult, the housekeeper dare not deal with it at all, and dare not delay any longer. Miss Wenwen's body had changed, and Wenwen's father, hadn't returned yet, so the housekeeper had no choice but to ask Yu Yanhui how to deal with it. The hasty knock on the door didn't wake her up, so the housekeeper had no choice but to try to open the door. Unexpectedly, she didn't lock the door, and the next scene made the butler freeze in place in shock, not daring to move. Yu Yanhui was actually wearing a bright red princess dress and lying on the ground. The princess dress didn't fit well, it looked very funny on her, and because it was put on hard, the thread broke in some places. In Wen's family, the one who likes to wear red princess dresses the most is the tenderness who has just died. In addition to the princess dress, she wore a big red hairpin and bracelet on her head, a pair of wet and ill-fitting shoes stared at her feet. Bloody red was smeared on his mouth, his eyes were closed tightly, and his face was pale, just like when Wen was fished out of the lake that day. The housekeeper took a look and found that the clothes on Yu Yanhui's body were all the things she let herself burn a few days ago. He stumbled and fell to the ground. Abandoning the business negotiations in other places, Wen, his father, rushed back, but besides the sad news of Wen Wen's death, there were two other more difficult things waiting for him. Wearing a red princess dress, he fainted and has not woken up to this day. The second is that his daughter's gentle body has just changed. Only when he saw Wen Wen's corpse did he realize the seriousness of the matter. Gentle's corpse was originally placed flat in the coffin, but now it is sitting upright, as if it wants to crawl out of the coffin. Eyes open, looking straight ahead. What's even more surprising is that the shroud that was put on was constantly bubbling water, tick tick tick, just like Wenro had just been salvaged from the artificial lake in the yard. Water dripped down the broken hair on Gentle's forehead, which looked like tears. This Wen Wen couldn't help taking a few steps back. He didn't expect such a change in Wen Wen's body. He turned his eyes to the butler, hoping to get an answer from the butler. After Wen Wen stepped into the back hall, the butler felt the temperature in the back hall drop a few degrees, and the wind blew into the back hall, like the sound of faint crying, but Wen Wen's attention was on Wen Wen, and for this nothing was noticed. He wrapped his arms around him, feeling a little scared, but when he saw Wen Wen's gaze, he could only whisper, "Master, why don't you invite a master to take a look?" Nonsense, if the Wen family invites the master to come to the door, news of strange things happening in the Wen family will fly all over Zuncan in half an hour. At this time, what Wen Wen was thinking about was still the reputation of the Wen family. Anything that would damage his reputation, not even his daughter. The housekeeper didn't expect that Wen Wen's most important thing now was the Wen family's reputation. He had no choice but to continue to persuade, "Master, Madam has actually encountered strange things for several days in a row. Items that did not belong to her appeared on the side of the pillow for no reason. Those items were obviously burned, but, Madam actually put them on last night. I can't take it off now, plus the eldest lady has been unwilling to close her eyes. The Wen family may have provoked evil spirits." The Wen family kept pacing in the back hall with their hands behind their backs, and the cold wind in the back hall made him tremble. "Go, go please." As soon as he looked up, he saw Wen Wen's sad eyes, and when he thought about Yu Yanhui's strange things happening for several days in a row, Yu reading www.yuyuganshu.com. Wen's family can't have more news for people to write. "Master, this is Master Feng." According to Wen Wen's instructions, the butler found a master. When a girl who looked about 20 years old appeared in front of Wen Wen happened to be drinking tea. He choked on the tea and coughed violently. The girl was wearing a white sportswear, her black hair was tied into a ponytail, and she looked capable. She was Feng Nian, the girl who was guarding the door during the reporter's interview that day. But Wen Wen couldn't care less about coughing, and while covering his mouth, he signaled the housekeeper to come to him. He blamed the housekeeper for bringing a master back casually. Seeing that the master was young and different from the immortal master they had imagined, a sense of distrust appeared on his face. Seeing that Wen Wen didn't trust Feng Nian, the housekeeper immediately retorted, "Master, don't look at Master Feng's young age, she really has two talents." The old housekeeper's mother fell ill, and his wife rolled down the stairs for no reason, causing a broken left leg, and his son was hit on the head by a ball. The butler was very busy, and when he was almost hit by a car on the road, Feng Nian gave him a hand and gave him some advice, so the butler's family finally settled down. While Wen Wen was talking to the housekeeper, Feng Nian silently looked at the Wen family's villa. This is a villa surrounded by mountains and rivers. Although it is at the foot of the mountain, it is at the entrance of spiritual energy. According to the Zai Jing, the dragon head of Yangzai is in high and the tail is in Si. Wen's house is in the Si position, which is long way. People who live here can rely on this aura to bless their descendants. When I took a closer look, I found that there was a trace of black air in the villa, which seemed to be restlessness in the inner house. If the problem in the inner house is not dealt with, no matter how much spiritual energy there is, it will not be able to absorb it. It seems that this family is about to lose. Ahem, Wen Wen cleared his throat, with a smile on his face, and was about to explain why the Wen family invited Feng Nian to come, but was interrupted by Feng Nian. "Let's stay in the back hall and lead the way." The housekeeper immediately led Feng Nian towards the back hall with a smile, followed by Wen Wen. Seeing that she could tell at a glance that the problem was in the back hall, Wen Wen also trusted her a little more. It's just that when everyone came to the back hall, Wen Wen's corpse changed a lot more seriously than an hour ago. Water dripped directly from the four corners of the coffin to the ground, and almost all the ground in the back hall was covered with large and small water. "Hang!" The expression on Wenro's face became more ferocious, and his eyes even started to shed blood and tears. The temperature in the entire back hall is icy cold, as if you are in a large freezer. Seeing this scene, Wen Wen took a few steps back in fear, while the butler simply hid outside the back hall door. Feng Nian, on the other hand, walked up to Wenro directly, took out a black peachwood nail, pointed it at Wenro's forehead, and pressed it down. The wooden nail was inserted into the forehead, and he closed his eyes gently, and then fell down slowly. The water stains on the ground still did not disappear, but the cold feeling in the back hall dissipated a lot. "Master, is this all right?" Wen Wen saw Wenro had slowly closed his eyes, the ferocious expression on his face gradually dissipated, and his face regained his calm. The water on his body also dried up at a speed visible to the naked eye. The smile on his face couldn't help deepening. "It's absolutely impossible." Although Wenro's body has recovered a little, the real problem has not been solved, and she still won't be at peace. "Sleeping willows, your family has a tradition of using willow coffins." Feng Nian pointed to the dark coffin, and with just one glance, she could see that the coffin was made of century-old willow wood, and it was very dark. "As long as you get close, you will feel the cold air." Wen Wen immediately turned his head to look at the butler. He had just rushed back from other places, and he was distracted by the change of Wen Wen's body. On the contrary, he didn't see the problem with the coffin. Although he didn't know much about the coffin, he could see Feng Nian's expression was serious, and he suddenly felt that he had caused a catastrophe. The butler also looked dazed. He only asked people to quickly find a coffin, but he didn't expect it to be a willow coffin. The coffins were all pitch black, so he didn't know how to tell them apart. Seeing the appearance of the housekeeper and Wen Wen, Feng Nian shook his head heavily. The willows were summoning their souls, and sleeping in willows' coffins would make the dead feel uneasy. If it is not handled properly, the Wen family will definitely be wiped out. What's more, people who use willow coffins may never be seen again. Now Wen Wen had no choice but to pin his hopes on Feng Nian, and asked in a low voice, "Then I'll have someone choose a good coffin again immediately, and ask Master to do it for the Wen family." Feng Nian didn't answer, but instead paced slowly beside the willow coffin. The girl inside the coffin was about 14 years old, her eyes were closed tightly, her nose was straight, her mouth was delicate, her curly flaxen hair hung over her shoulders. Although her face was pale, she must have been a little beauty when she was alive. She drowned at the age of Huahua. It's a pity. Aside from here, are there other changes in the house? Feng Nian asked suddenly, because she sensed the black air surrounding the warm house. Up to this point, Wen Wen had already trusted Feng Nian a bit more, and he immediately signaled the housekeeper to tell Feng Nian exactly what happened in the past few days. After listening to the butler's description, Feng Nian had a more or less understanding of Wen's residence. Objects appearing next to Mrs. Wen's pillow for several days in a row should be a prank by ghosts, and the change of Wenro's body is the death of someone in Wen's house, and the rise of Yin Qi gives evil spirits an opportunity to take advantage of it. These two things should be done by the same evil spirit, and it seems that this evil spirit will continue to appear tonight. Asking Wen's family to prepare another coffin for Ro, and after Wenro was moved there, Feng Nian stopped Wen Wen from having the willow coffin burned. Because that evil spirit most likely came because of this willow coffin, and keeping this coffin can attract that evil spirit to show up again. Wen Wen followed Feng Nian's instructions in everything, and asked people to put the replaced willow coffin side by side next to Wenro's new coffin. There were two dark coffins in the back hall, which made people feel creepy. And the temperature in the back hall seems to have dropped a lot, and the wind blows from time to time, making a woo-woo-woo sound. The housekeeper took Feng Nian to the guest room, because tonight, Feng Nian would stay in the Wen residence, waiting for the evil spirit to show its true colors. It's night, and the surroundings of Wen's house are quiet. Tonight, Feng Nian specifically explained that no one can leave the room, or they will bear the consequences. Everyone in the Wen family felt that today was different from usual, so no one dared to stay outside the room, so they closed the door early in the morning to rest. Looking out through the window of the guest room, the pale moonlight shone on the backyard of Wen's family. Half of the remaining red roses in the flower bed glowed bewitching red under the moonlight. Papa Papa, a burst of cheerful footsteps sounded outside the empty corridor. Everyone in Wen's house has fallen asleep, no need to ask, the footsteps at this time are that evil. Hearing the approaching footsteps, Feng Nian knew that it was coming. Clenching the talisman in her hand, Feng Nian stood up, she was ready. At this moment, her head was dizzy, the scene in front of her was gradually blurred, she said badly in her heart, she looking at the roses outside the window, the flowers are still bright red, and there is something wrong with the fragrance of those flowers. Before she completely lost consciousness, Yu reading www.yuyuganshu.com saw a pair of bright red shoes in front of her eyes. In the middle of the night, Wan Lai was silent, the air temperature was abnormally low, and even the misty miasma could be seen under the moonlight. In the Chinnan cemetery, a black sedan chair was slowly walking along the road, and from time to time there was a rustling sound of the grass being brushed by the sedan chair. This is a hard-clothed sedan chair carried by two people, with a pagode-top shape, and the body of an ordinary sedan chair is full of patterns of blooming auspicious flowers, but this sedan chair body is full of evil spirits. What's even more frightening is that the sedan chair was not carried by a bearer, and it still swayed forward like this. As soon as the wind blew, a corner of the curtain of the sedan chair was lifted, and a girl was lying quietly inside. The girl was wearing sportswear, fair skin, oval face, a head of hair scattered on both sides of her shoulders, her lips were tightly pressed, and her eyes were closed. She is Feng Nian. The sedan chair wobbled and stopped suddenly, and a pitch-black coffin appeared just like that. Suddenly, two undead people appeared beside the sedan chair that no one was carrying. These two living dead are actually dead people who refused to swallow their last breath of resentment, and still supported their corpses to move. Without vitality, the skin on the body will slowly fester, the muscles will slowly rot, and finally turn into white bones. The muscles on the two living dead had already begun to rot, and they still smelled of rotting flesh. Feng Nian was dragged out of the sedan chair by these two living dead bearers. The pitch-black coffin was just placed in the big pit just dug, and the soil around the big pit was still moist. Feng Nian was dragged away by someone, and then he slowly came to his senses. Just now, he seemed to be dangling in the sedan chair, but now he opened his eyes and realized that he was really pushed out of the sedan chair by someone, no, by a living dead. Pulled out. I met a living dead carrying a sedan chair. Feng Nian felt very disgusted, because when she was pulled by the bearer of the undead, she could see clearly that the bearer's hands were rotten, pieces of rotten flesh were hanging on the skeleton, and the rotten smell wafted from time to time. Flooding around, strips of maggots just fell from their bodies, wriggling on the ground. Sister, I've been waiting for you for a long time, and you're finally here. Feng Nian looked sideways at the source of the voice, only to see a bright red color appear in front of her eyes. This is tenderness. Rira was still wearing a bright red princess dress, and the childlike smile on her face was replaced by her eerie smile, her mouth was grinning on her cheeks, her eyes were empty, and she was staring straight at Feng Nian. She used the fragrance of roses to make Feng Nian unconscious. She brought Feng Nian who was in Wen's residence to this cemetery. The master who came here was to solve the strange things that happened in Wen's residence. The cemetery was full of yin and now Feng Nian couldn't move. She was confident that Feng Nian could become a sacrifice quietly. Feng Nian was still unable to move for a moment. When she saw Wen Rou, she knew that everything in Wen's house came from gentle hands. Now, she could only watch helplessly as the two bearers of the living dead dragged her towards the coffin, and she could feel that her back was already covered with a thick layer of mud. The stench of the soil and the rancid smell of the bearers all filled her nostrils. For an ordinary person, he would have already vomited out. At this moment, the carrion hanging from the arm of one of the living dead bearers suddenly fell to the ground, making a slight noise, but he didn't care, and pulled Feng Nian straight over. The carrion was crushed like this, and turned into a puddle of meat, with white maggots wriggling inside, enjoying the sudden deliciousness. Feng Nian's whole body had been dragged to the edge of the coffin, and soon, he was ruthlessly thrown into the coffin, making a dull sound. She didn't have time to make a sound, and the dark coffin lid was slowly sealed on the top of the coffin, and there was a bang-bang sound of nailing the coffin outside, which was the sound of sealing the coffin. The air in the coffin was getting less and less, and she knew that as soon as the sound of sealing the coffin fell, she would be buried in this wilderness tonight. The original bumping sound like raindrops gradually decreased, and soon stopped, which means that the coffin has been sealed. The pitch-black coffin was just sealed with 18 huge coffin nails. Standing by the big pit and looking at the coffin of the living dead, she let out a gentle giggle laugh, which didn't match her at all, with ivory white skin and flaxen slightly curly hair, like a delicate doll, but her red eyes actually shed blood-red tears. "Mom, wait for me, Roro will wake you up soon." More and more blood and tears flowed from Roro's eyes, and they dripped onto the dark coffin. This did not affect the two living dead people filling the coffin with soil. They all forgot that the living Feng Nian was just lying in the coffin at this moment, quietly waiting for the last moment to come. Even though there was no pressure on her neck, Feng Nian still felt that she was about to suffocate, and the air in the coffin was almost exhausted. If this continued, this pitch-black coffin would really become her burial place. Not reconciled, what she hates the most on weekdays is bugs, and now there are still maggots that fell from the living dead just now in the coffin, and they are slowly crawling all over her body. As long as she dies, these maggots will definitely follow her nostrils, crawling in through the ear canal, sucking his white brain. A few crows hovered in the sky, they were attracted by the smell of carrion from the living dead. A daring crow swooped down and quickly snatched away a piece of carrion that the living dead had left on the ground. The other one followed suit, but unexpectedly, the living dead man stretched out his arm and twisted the crow's neck. The crow kept flopping, and the living dead man stuffed the crow into his mouth. Completely no longer fluttering. The crow hovering in the low sky sensed the danger and flew away immediately. "It's almost time, Mom." The gentle mouth grinned even wider, as if it wanted to tear people apart. As long as Feng Nian dies, she can call back her long-dead mother. She began to recite the dull spirit calling spell silently, using Feng Nian as a living sacrifice in exchange for the return of the dead. After the spirit summoning spell ended, the ground where the coffin was originally buried began to shake and vibrate, as if something was about to break out of the ground. There was a loud touch, and the soil that had been filled in was splashed around and dust was flying. After the dust dissipated, Ruan thought that it was her long-missed mother who appeared in front of her, but she didn't know it was Feng Nian. "Aren't you dead?" Rura shouted out the doubts in her heart, but she didn't notice the trace of fear in her voice. She thought that Feng Nian, who was sealed in the coffin, would have bulging eyeballs, protruding tongue, livid skin, and an ugly death. Feng Nian stretched out his hand to flick off the maggots moving on his arm, raised his head, and looked at Wen Rou with a smile. "You think you can trap me with just a coffin?" Unbelievable. With a gentle face, "This coffin is made of willow wood that is hundreds of years old." Reading www.uuganshu.com. The 18 coffin nails that sealed the coffin were made with the resentment of the living dead gathered for 100 years. It is impossible for ordinary people to open this sealed coffin. "Tell me, how do you want me to punish you?" Feng Nian pinched her nose, the living dead in front of her didn't make her feel terrified, but the smell of rotten flesh was really bad, which made her feel that she just wanted to be happy. To end it all. Wenro quickly recovered from the shock. Her eyes had stopped bleeding, but the marks on her cheeks had not disappeared, which made her look even more eerie. She was a little afraid of Feng Nian's aura. She had never seen anyone come out of a sealed willow coffin. Feng Nian took a few more steps in the gentle direction. "I'll take you to accompany your mother." As soon as she finished speaking, a golden formation formed in her hand, and in an instant, a golden formation formed in the gentle the feet are generated. The golden formation immediately transformed into golden branches, enveloping tenderness. She found that she couldn't move her hands and feet, and slowly turned her head, like a robot, turning her head directly behind her back, and she signaled the two living dead to come up to help. The two living dead immediately moved forward with their carrion arms, trying to pull the golden branches away from the tenderness. Unexpectedly, as soon as their hands touched the branches, the rotting meat immediately gave off a burning smell, and soon disappeared into a puff of black smoke. They immediately let go of their hands, leaving only bones on their arms, and the grey-white finger bones were clearly visible. After the living dead roared in pain towards the sky, he dropped his tenderness and ran towards Feng Nian recklessly. Because they knew that it was Feng Nian that caused them to be almost wiped out just now. They exhaled a mass of grievances from their mouths, and once they were contaminated by these grievances, they would be like them, turning flesh to bones. Seeing that the resentment exhaled by the living dead was about to touch Feng Nian's face, the corner of Feng Nian's mouth curled up into a smile, and he saw two talismans moving towards the two living dead, one left and one right. The spell was right on the forehead of the living dead. The two living dead never thought that she, who was busy manipulating the golden formation, could separate her hands to deal with them. They only had time to make a sound of. The spell directly restrained the activities of the living dead, making them slowly spit out the resentment in their mouths. After the resentment was exhausted, the carrion on the living dead slowly fell off, and the white bones turned black at a speed visible to the naked eye, turning into black smoke and floating in the air. Seeing that Feng Nian easily broke up the two living dead, Ro quickly turned her head back, and the blood and tears in her eyes slowly turned black. As soon as these black tears touched the golden branches wrapped around her body, the golden branches made a sizzling sound and turned black. Not good. Feng Nian saw that the golden branches had turned black under the influence of the black tears, and were still withering at an extremely fast speed, when Ro had already begun to break free from the shackles of the golden formation. The binding force of the golden formation gradually weakened, and the gentle giggle laughter was especially terrifying and eerie in the empty suburbs of the city. Black tears occupied most of her gentle face, and the sincerity and loveliness on her face was replaced by gloom. Regardless of being wrapped around her body by golden branches, she slowly walked towards Feng Nian, step by step. Now, she only has one obsession, and that is to seal Feng Nian back into the willow coffin, because her intuition tells her that Feng Nian is definitely the most suitable sacrifice. With a living sacrifice and the singing of the resurrection spell, her long-dead mother will return. There was a thin layer of sweat on Feng Nian's forehead. The effectiveness of the golden formation was gradually weakening, and the outline of the golden formation on the ground was about to dissipate. Ruan thought that she had gained the upper hand. Just when she stretched out her hand that had turned into sharp claws to catch Feng Nian, the golden formation suddenly appeared with golden light. Golden light kills evil, go! Feng Nian formed a barrier with his hands, and a beam of golden light went directly towards Gentle's heart. Ah! There was a gloomy roar, and a thick, black resentment was peeled off from Wenro's body. After the resentment was peeled off, the gentle eyes regained their clarity, the black tears on his face disappeared, and his face returned to its former appearance. Her grievances accumulated so quickly, one is because she was put into a willow coffin after death, and the other is because she had accumulated grievances. Now that Feng Nian has dispersed the grievances from her body, she has recovered her former life appearance. The surroundings suddenly became quiet, as if nothing had happened, only the faint rotten smell in the air proved that the living dead had indeed appeared just now. After everything was over, Feng Nian let out a long breath. With her right hand, she gently turned the bracelet on her left hand, and the color of the bracelet became more lavender. Fortunately, with this bracelet just now, she was able to form a magic circle quickly in an emergency, and unleash the powerful resentment on Wenro. This bracelet was put on her hand by her grandfather himself before he died. Originally, the bracelet was as transparent as crystal, but after wearing it on her hand, it turned into a ring that fit her hand. It should be a magic weapon. And she also found that every time the evil spirits were dealt with, the color of the bracelet would gradually change to a light purple, and the power of the magic circle would gradually increase. On the side, Wenro stood quietly. Although she had returned to her former appearance, her face was still as pale as a piece of white paper. She was annoyed, as if she had done something wrong, waiting for Feng Nian to criticize her. The gentle expression made Feng Nian feel unbearable. She walked up to Wenro, stretched out her hand to gently rub the flaxen hair of Wenro, and said with a smile, "Rura, sister has already driven out the resentment in your body, you have already passed away. Wait for me to choose an auspicious day for you, and help you reincarnate." Although Feng Nian's resentment had been dispersed by Feng Nian, she still held on with half a breath. Originally, he was supposed to reincarnate on the night of returning to the soul, but because of the entanglement of resentment, he did not make it. Feng Nian decided to send the Buddha to the west to help Wenro. Rura opened her eyes, looked at Feng Nian in disbelief, and murmured, But I almost buried you alive just now, sister." Feng Nian shook his head lightly. Everything has a cause and effect. Wen's death had hidden secrets. Wen, as Wen's father, not only did not pay attention, but only cared about the Wen family's reputation, which made her feel unhappy. The resentment increased, and she lost her mind. Although Rura did all the scary things in Wen's house, she didn't kill anyone in the end, so he naturally wouldn't destroy her, let alone make her return indefinitely. Seeing that Feng Nian sincerely wanted to save her, Rura put a sincere smile on her face again, and bowed to Feng Nian, "Thank you, sister." She fell straight down on the cold cemetery. Feng Nian took out a peachwood nail, and drove it into Gentle's forehead again. Originally, she had already driven a peachwood nail into Gentle's forehead this morning, but Wenro's resentment rushed the peachwood nail out. Although Ruanro has dissipated her resentment, she still needs to nail it into her forehead with peachwood nails to avoid further incidents. After nailing the peachwood nails to make sure everything was safe, she gently put it into the bag. She checked the time and found that it was already 1 o'clock in the morning. Looking at the willow coffin that was erected because she escaped just now, reading www.yuyuganshu.com is particularly creepy in the empty cemetery. Now it is not far from the time when the yin is at its worst tonight. Even if someone from the Wen family pulls away the coffin, Wenro will find it difficult to leave the cemetery without anyone opening the yin to the road. Opening the yin road means that when the deceased with resentment transfers at night, a person with a very hard fate and a fire character should open the way. Otherwise the wandering spirits on the roadside will haunt the living, and the deceased will be disturbed, which is easy. Dead body. And although the resentment on Wenro had dissipated, the wandering souls by the roadside were very keen. They could feel the resentment left on Wenro, and it was easier to scare Wenro to death. What's more, this willow coffin is very dark, and it is the favorite of wandering souls and resentful spirits. She almost let this coffin be suppressed just now. The most appropriate way is to guard the coffin and gentle corpse, and take them away together after dawn tomorrow. Feng Nian knew that she would sleep in the cemetery tonight, so she used her feet to sweep up the dust on the ground, and pulled out some weeds for the bottom, and she lay down directly on it. Lying in the gloomy cemetery, she could not care much about the howling of crows that came to her ears from time to time. With her around, ordinary wandering spirits and evil spirits would not dare to appear. As soon as she closed her eyes, she fell into a deep sleep. When the light opened the heavy curtain on the horizon, the sun began to appear, and a new day began. Feng Nian woke up from his sleep. She stretched her waist, patted the weeds sticking to her back, and looked at the dark willow coffin again. She made a phone call to the housekeeper of Wen's house, and ordered someone to take away the coffin and Wenro, and repeatedly told her that Wenro must not be put into the willow coffin, which must be burned immediately. Although he was surprised why Feng Nian went to the cemetery in the south of the city, the housekeeper still didn't ask, and hid his doubts in his heart. The housekeeper agreed to Feng Nian's instructions one by one. Seeing that steward Wen had no problem with her instructions, Feng Nian took the first bus in the morning to school with confidence. When she stepped into the back door of the classroom, the class bell just rang. Today's first class is the old man Lu Hua who likes roll call the most. Old man Lu Hua rolled his eyes at Feng Nian who came in through the back door. His dissatisfaction was clearly shown on his face, but he didn't make things difficult for her, and motioned her to sit down and listen to the class. Feng Nian crawled along the pole, and immediately sat down in the last row. The two boys who were originally sitting in the last row and planned to doze off in class saw her sitting down, hurriedly packed their books and moved forward a few rows. Feng Nian saw disgust in their eyes, but also a little fear. After the girl in the front row glanced at Feng Nian, she lowered her voice, "Look, she is the one who said that Mr. Su is haunted by evil spirits. She still believes in this age." Feng Nian was already used to the gazes and words of the crowd. She sighed in her heart, she shouldn't have meddled back then. When teaching her metaphysics, her grandfather once said that she should not be nosy, but Feng Nian didn't take it to heart. "But now I really feel the disadvantages of being nosy." Originally, she could still live in the dormitory of the school, but because she saw the blackness on her roommate Liao Sujun, she kindly reminded her and used a spell to pat away the evil spirits on her body. Unexpectedly, Liao Sujun bit back, saying that he was talking nonsense in the school, so she was not allowed to live in the dormitory in the school. Afterwards, the classmates distanced themselves from her, turning around and leaving as soon as they saw her. Facing the intentional estrangement of her classmates in the school, Feng Nian didn't take it to heart. Anyway, she was used to walking alone since she was a child. There was no class in the afternoon, so she went to the supermarket, bought some daily necessities and food, and then returned to her rented house. After Feng Nian opened the door, he saw the female ghost lying by the window discussing the most popular lipstick number of this year with two paper figurines. "Those are two people made of paper, they look lifelike, and they look like girls." She remembered that the two paper figurines were originally placed next to the wall of the house next door. Paper people, as the name suggests, are people made of paper. During the Yao, Yu, and Shun periods, in order to replace living people for burial, people were drafted into human beings, named Chuling, who were chanted by wizards to show that they had human nature, and then cremated. Later, after the appearance of paper, paper figurines gradually evolved in this way, and various paper-made supplies appeared, such as suitcases, daily necessities, and transportation products, etc., to pay homage to ancestors. The day before yesterday, a neighbor moved in next door and brought a lot of paper-made supplies, including a few paper figurines, paper-made villas, carriages, and horses, which should be for the paper-made business. Later, due to the limited space in the room, the two paper figurines were placed in the corner. "It's just that I didn't expect that the female ghost and the paper figurine would chat, and it seems that they became best friends." After seeing Feng Nian, the two paper figurines showed astonished expressions on their extremely white faces. After the female ghost explained, they quietly glanced at her again, and silently retreated to the corner of the wall, pretending that it's just an ordinary paper doll that couldn't be more ordinary. Feng Nian ignored them. Anyway, the female ghost had two more girlfriends, and it wasn't hers. She took out two self-heating hot pots, unpacked them, poured in water according to the instructions on the packages, and all that was left was to wait. When she stepped into the school this morning, the text message on her mobile phone reminded her that there was a money transfer. She saw that it was Wen who transferred it. Calculating the time, it should be the time when butler Wen brought Wenro back to Wen's residence. No need to guess, the housekeeper must have brought all of her words to Wen. Later, the housekeeper made a special phone call to her. Apart from expressing his gratitude on behalf of Wen, he also asked her to be responsible for the gentle funeral. Of course, she agreed to make money. 15 minutes later, the self-heating hot pot was cooked, and the fragrance wafted throughout the room. The female ghost stretched her neck to look at the self-heating hot pot, but she didn't dare to make any further moves, for fear that she would be thrown out of the house by Feng Nian like last time. The two paper figurines on the side of the wall could no longer hold ordinary paper figurines, and they also stretched their necks to look into the room. This made her a little worried whether the paper figurines' paper necks were strong, and they would not be broken with a tear in a while. She didn't want to knock on the neighbor's door and explain why the paper figurine's neck was broken. She took one of the self-heating hot pots and put it in front of the female ghost, signaling to share it with the two new paper figurine girlfriends, and then slowly ate with her own. It's good to have the living expenses, at least I can afford the high-priced self-heating hot pot. After eating instant noodles for so long, the taste in my mouth is gone. Seeing the self-heating hot pot in front of her, the female ghost showed a surprised smile on her pale face. She waved her hand lightly and attracted two paper figurines who were huddled in the corner. One ghost and two paper figurines sat in the corner with contented faces. Enjoy the sudden deliciousness. After filling her stomach, the female ghost saw that Feng Nian didn't dislike the paper figurines, so she simply dragged them into the room, and gathered together to continue talking about the topic that was interrupted just now. After she only glanced at them, she let them go. Anyway, it's not a bad thing for the female ghost to have two more friends. She went back to the bedroom, patted the pillow, and was ready to rest. She would go to Wen's house tomorrow to deal with the next thing. In the dream, she returned to that place again. Roof ridges, corners, eaves corners, under eaves, hanging belts, and screen walls are made of colored inlaid porcelain to form relief patterns. Capitals, beams, bucket arches, beams, and lintels are carved with wood carvings. The main wall, facade, and plaque are stone carvings. This is the ancestral hall of the Feng family, and it is also the largest and most spectacular ancestral hall in 100 miles. Sue hasn't been in the ancestral hall for a long time. Reading www.yuyuganshu.com regarding the details of the ancestral hall. Feng Nian doesn't remember very clearly. The only clear memory is that the porcelain inlaid on the roof of the usual ancestral hall should be double dragon play beads in the style of peonies, riches, and honors. On the roof of Feng's ancestral hall, the patterns made of porcelain inlays are grinning evil spirits. Black wedding dress, buried in the sky pit. If you don't enter the pit, you will be cursed. If you curse the family, you will have a pregnant woman. She heard the song chanted by her aunt Feng Hengzhen again. Hee, you all deserve it, you all deserve it. Aunt Feng Hengzhen's crazy voice sounded again. Holding another doll in her arms, she rushed towards the Feng family's ancestral hall regardless of her own safety. There was no suspense that my aunt was once again stopped outside the gate of the ancestral hall. The second aunt, Peng King Mei, dragged her aunt away from the ancestral hall, and said, "Xin, it's all over, you can let it go too." But my aunt still stared at the ancestral hall with resentful eyes, and the sound of hee in her mouth seemed helpless and mocking. Feng Nian stood aside, looking at her aunt who was pulled away from the ancestral hall. The red marks on her hands were deeply reflected in Feng Nian's eyes, and she couldn't help shivering. "Son, don't be afraid." The grandfather's wrinkled hand took Feng Nian's little hand and led her away from the ancestral hall. The phone's alarm clock rang on time, pulling Feng Nian out of his sleep. Feng Nian reached out to wipe his forehead, and the palm of his hand was indeed full of sweat again. Although he was expelled from the old house of the Feng family, the scene inside the Feng family still appeared in his dreams from time to time. The only difference was that he could no longer hold the warm hands of his grandfather. Maybe it was because those memories of the Feng family reappeared, or maybe it was because he was nostalgic for the warmth his grandfather brought him. Feng Nian sat quietly. 15 minutes later, the phone's alarm clock rang again, and Feng Nian finally left the warm bed. After coming out of the rented house, Feng Nian went straight to Wen's house. This time, when the people at the gate of Wen's house saw her, they hurriedly welcomed her in, because Wen had specifically told her that they must be very polite to her. She was greeted by the servants and taken to the back hall. In the corridor of the back hall, servants passed by from time to time, holding things to be prepared for the funeral in their hands, busy but not chaotic. I heard that late last night, Yu Yanhui, who had been wearing a red princess dress all the time, after she dispelled the resentment from Wen's body, the clothes on her body turned into black paper ashes in an instant, but she still hasn't woken up yet. The gentle funeral was arranged by Wen himself. There were people passing by outside the back hall, but except for Feng Nian, only Wen and another girl were left in the back hall. The girl was very similar to Wen, she was wearing a black dress, she looked sad, but said nothing. She threw the paper money into the fire in front of her, and the flame turned the paper money into ashes. After Wen greeted Feng Nian, he took the initiative to introduce the girl to her. "Master, this is the gentle sister, Wen Qing." After the introduction, Wen hesitated and said, "Master, please help Wen Qing." "Look, she hasn't said a word since Wenro left. He has 2 daughters, and after Wenro left, only warmth is left." Feng Nian walked around Wen Qing, and replied softly, "Second miss is not infected with evil spirits." The implication is that she can't help Wen Qing either. Her words made Wen sigh heavily. Warmth has seen many doctors, but he has not found any cause of the disease. He originally placed his hope on Feng Nian, but he did not expect that hope was still in vain. After taking a look at Wen Qing, Wen then turned to ask Feng Nian what he needed to pay attention to about Wen's funeral. Gentleness was born in the year of Dinju, the month of Renzi, and the day of Giu. Today is an auspicious day. When the time comes, I will be able to send her on the road smoothly. She glanced at the back hall, and the coffin that placed Wenro had already been replaced. The willow coffin has also been burned, and the temperature inside is no longer icy cold, which proves that Wenro is fine, and she is willing to reincarnate on the road in her heart. This made it much easier, and she no longer needed to restrain her gentle soul. The housekeeper came to Wen's side and whispered something in a low voice. Wen nodded and signaled the butler to get busy. He came to Feng Nian and said, "Master, I'm going to the front to greet you. I will trouble you here." Feng Nian nodded. Soon, only her and the warmth of burning paper money were left in the back hall. The door of the Wen family was rarely opened, but today it has been opened to the outside, and guests wearing dark clothes keep entering through the door. A low-key and luxurious black car slowly stopped in front of Wen's house. "Young master, the Wen family has arrived." A bodyguard opened the door for the people in the car. A boy got out of the car, wearing a black suit. He should be about 14 years old. He looked up at Wen's house, and it was the same as when he used to come here, but it lacked the gentleness that promised to be a good friend for a lifetime. His surname is Wei, and his name is Wei Kong. After Wei Kong entered through the gate, he came to the garden. In the garden, the left and right sides are full of wreaths. In the center of the main hall hangs a black and white photo. The picture is gentle. Stopping in front of the tender posthumous photo, Wei Kong bowed deeply 3 times. Wei Kong looked up, and the gentleness in the posthumous photo still had a smiling face, with ivory white skin and flaxen slightly curly hair. "Master Wei," Wen stopped beside Wei Kong. Wei Kong was the only grandson of the Wei family in Zhongken, and was protected by the Wei family like an eyeball. Wen wasn't surprised that he came to a gentle funeral today. Wei Kong's mother and Wen's mother are best friends, and Wei Kong and Wen are about the same age, so they played together since they were young. Looking at the gentle portrait, Wei Kong recalled many memories. "When I was young, Wenro often chased after him, and did many mischievous things with him, pulling up the flowers that my grandfather carefully cultivated, and smashing the purple sand teapot that the old man treasured for a long time. The usual scenes are as clear as yesterday. It's just that he didn't expect Wenro to die suddenly. Wei Kong proposed to Wen that he wanted to see the gentle side and send her off for the last time. Wen made a please gesture with his hand, and led Wei Kong to the back hall where Wenro's coffin was. When Wei Kong came to the back hall, he saw a person lying beside the gentle coffin. After thinking about it for a while, he guessed that the person should be the undertaker, who made the final dressing for Wenro. I wanted to say thank you to this funeral director as Wenro's good friend, and thank her for making the final dressing for Wenro, but I never thought that as soon as I walked in, I heard a puff. A wooden nail was taken out from the forehead, and there was still thick red and black blood dripping down the wooden nail. What are you doing? Stop it! Wei Kong angrily stepped forward to stop this man's actions. Hearing Wei Kong's voice, Feng Nian turned around and found that it was a boy who was half a head shorter than himself. He ran nervously to the side of the coffin, looking at Wenro who was sleeping peacefully inside the coffin. Feng Nian didn't know the boy's origin, but he didn't seem to have heard of the Wen family having a boy. Reading www.yuyuganshu.com guessed that it should be to mourn the gentle person. She took out a handkerchief with a patch on it, and wrapped it carefully around the mahogany nail she took out from Gentle's forehead. Wei Kong saw that the gentleness in the coffin was still the same as he remembered, the original ivory white skin turned pale, flaxen slightly curly hair, with a smile on his mouth. But after taking out the peachwood nail, a nail-sized hole appeared on Gentle's forehead, because the blood had stopped flowing, and there was not much blood splashed out when the nail was taken out, only some black marks remained around the hole. Wei Kong turned to look at Feng Nian. He didn't expect someone to put a nail on Wenro's forehead. You're going too far, you actually. But before Wei Kong finished speaking, his gentle father Wen immediately explained, Master Wei, you misunderstood, Master Feng is helping Ro. Help? I've never heard of a mahogany nail that can be taken out after being driven into the forehead. Wei Kong didn't give Wen the slightest bit of contempt. However, Feng Nian became interested in this boy, because this boy looked about 14 years old, similar to Wenro's age, but he could tell at a glance that the nails he took out were peachwood nails. It seemed that he had researched this aspect, but research it should not be deep. Why don't you tell me why you nailed the peachwood nails? Feng Nian glanced at the boy, seeing his attire. His family was either rich or expensive. It's just that such a family shouldn't let his children get involved. This knowledge is right. Do you still need to ask? Peachwood nails are naturally used to prevent corpses and evil spirits. As soon as Wei Kong finished speaking, he looked at Wen incredulously. His gentle forehead would be nailed into peachwood nails. Could it be because Wenro almost got dead? Wen saw that he couldn't hide it anymore, so he nodded emphatically. After hearing Wen's explanation, after Wei Kong knew all this, although he knew that Feng Nian had to put a peachwood nail on Wen's forehead because he had to, but after taking out the peachwood nail, the wound on his forehead was too ugly. Feng Nian sighed softly. She took out the peachwood nails, firstly, to save some utensils. After all, she didn't have any extra money to buy. Secondly, her tenderness and resentment had disappeared. It was really unlucky to be buried with peachwood nails. But Wei Kong obviously cared about the scar caused by the peachwood nail on Wenro's head. She had no choice but to take out a spell, and lightly touched Wenro's forehead, only to see that the scar disappeared in an instant. The way Wei Kong looked at Feng Nian suddenly changed. It seemed a little complicated. Don't look at me like that, this is only temporary. Feng Nian really couldn't bear Wei Kong's gloomy appearance. Besides, she would faithfully count this spell in the Wen family's account. At this moment, someone's panicked footsteps sounded. Yu Yanhui, who always dressed herself very delicately, now her hair was messed up like a chicken coop, and she muttered, I'm not afraid of you, be gentle, even if you turn into a ghost, I will kill you too. Today, the entire Wen family was busy with the gentle funeral, and Yu Yanhui was unconscious for a long time, so everyone ignored her. Unexpectedly, when she woke up suddenly, she found a wooden stick from nowhere and broke a lot of things, and now she went straight to the back hall, heading for the gentle coffin. Yanhui, are you crazy? Hurry up and stop. Wen didn't expect that the always virtuous Yu Yanhui would act like a lunatic at this time, completely ignoring the presence of guests. Gentleness is there, look, she's there. Yu Yanhui didn't choose what to say, because she saw Wenro in a red dress standing in front of the coffin at this moment. Wenro's whole body was wet, and the water droplets were still ticking. Tick-tock dripping from the corner of the gentle skirt, a watermark has formed under the feet. The corner of the gentle mouth has already grinned to the side of the ear, as if to ask Yu Yanhui to go down to accompany her. Wen and Wei Kong both looked at the direction Yu Yanhui pointed at the same time. There was no one there at all. Don't you feel ashamed enough? Come here, take your wife down to rest. Wen was already faintly angry. What happened to Yu Yanhui? The embarrassment was thrown at home. Several servants stepped forward immediately, preparing to pull Yu Yanhui out of the back hall. But Yu Yanhui didn't know where the strength came from, but she opened the servant who was blocking her, and she walked towards the coffin where Wenro was. Without hesitation, she wanted to destroy Wenro. As long as she destroyed Wenro, everything would be over. In desperation, Wei Kong stood in front of the gentle coffin without hesitation. Yu Yanhui has lost her mind, and the stick in her hand is about to hurt Wei Kong. Without even thinking about it, Feng Nian prepared to stop her, but he didn't expect that someone was faster than him. As soon as he raised his hand, he threw her out directly. In Feng Nian's life, he had never seen a man who was so unsympathetic, yet made himself want to shout well done. The man was wearing a black suit, and the handmade leather shoes on his feet were spotless. He exuded a faint smell of tobacco, which was not pungent, but as attractive as alcohol. He was the man she met in Granny Xiang's coffin shop last time. Uncle Zhen, Wei Kong said with a smile on his face. He didn't expect Wei Zhen to attend the gentle funeral. Needless to say, Wei Zhen must have been worried about him, so he hurried over here. Master Wei, Wen's voice was trembling, maybe because he saw Wei Zhen who was powerful in Zun City, or maybe because he saw Yu Yanhui being thrown out. Fortunately, Wei Kong was not injured in Wen's house, otherwise, with Wei Zhen's temperament, Wen's house would definitely be destroyed. Hearing Wen call out Master Wei, Feng Nian knew that the man in front of him was Wei Zhen. There are many rumors about Wei Zhen in Zunken, most of them are decisive and ruthless. But Feng Nian felt that his impression of seeing Wei Zhen for the first time was somewhat different from the rumors. At least, he was very protective of his own people. But Wei Zhen's next move made Feng Nian feel even more distressed. Wei Zhen took out a custom-made handkerchief from the jacket pocket of his suit, and wiped off Yu Yanhui's fingers one by one, with disgust in his eyes, and threw the handkerchief on the ground after wiping. That handkerchief might have covered his living expenses for several months, and Wei Zhen just threw away the handkerchief without blinking or beating his heart. When Wei Zhen raised his head, he also noticed Feng Nian. If he hadn't come out in time, the girl would have rushed out to protect Wei Kong. She was in a dark black sportswear that was washed white, and her long hair was tied into a ponytail. Although there was no makeup on her face, she was much better than other women who had been well dressed. This was Wei Zhen's first impression of Feng Nian. Facing Feng Nian's defense of Wei Kong, Wei Zhen nodded slightly towards Feng Nian. Then he took Wei Kong to the front. After Wei Zhen left, the oppressive feeling in the air suddenly disappeared a lot. Wen threw a sharp glance at Yu Yanhui who was fainted on the ground, said shame, and asked the servants to take Yu Yanhui down. Anyway, it doesn't matter whether Yu Yanhui is present at the gentle funeral. The most important thing is that Yu Yanhui made herself and the Wen family humiliated in front of Wei Zhen. After Wen nicely asked Feng Nian to help see if there was anything else that needed attention in Wen's funeral, Yu reading book www.yuyuganshu.com also left the back hall. He hurriedly went to Wei Zhen to explain Yu Yanhui's almost in the matter of hurting Wei Kong. The Wen family cannot do without the care of the Wei family no matter what. When only Feng Nian was left in the back hall, Feng Nian turned around and looked in front of the coffin. Because at this time, Wenrou's soul body was standing in front of the coffin, and Wenrou saw everything that happened just now. And when Yu Yanhui yelled that she saw Wenrou, Feng Nian actually also saw Wenrou, but she knew that this must be Wenrou's last wish, so she didn't say anything. Sister, thank you. Wen's face was as pale as a piece of white paper, and she tried hard to squeeze a smile from her face. She walked towards Feng Nian, stretched out her faintly visible little hand, and placed it on Feng Nian's hand. Feng Nian felt a burst of cold air passing from her hands to her whole body. She couldn't help shivering, and scenes of gentle experiences appeared in front of her eyes. On my 4th birthday, with my favorite doll in my arms. I know that today will be the same as in previous years. Many people will come to my birthday party, they will smile and say happy birthday to me, and they will stuff gifts into my arms. I haven't seen my mother for a long time. My mother must be busy preparing for my birthday. Today is my birthday, I will definitely see my mother. The housekeeper uncle came to me and told me to take me to see my mother. I laughed happily, urging the housekeeper to go faster from time to time, but I didn't notice the sad expression on the housekeeper's face. As soon as I stepped into the room, although it had been covered by the scent of flowers, I could still smell the faint smell of medicine and the stench of decay inside. There was a thick layer of dust on the curtains, which had not been opened for a long time.